Redfish is how I got started in dragging. I came to Portland after high school, hoping to get on a redfish boat, and there were the big company boats were still fishing them then. There was the St. Patrick, the Red Jacket, and the Wawanock, and they were owned by, I think, Maine Fisheries or O'Donnell Hewson, or whether that was one company or not, I don't know. The wharf was Maine Fisheries maybe, and the company was O'Donnell Hewson. Anyway, the wharf is still here in Portland. The redfish boats are long gone. Those boats were immaculately, this would have been in the early 70s, and at the time, redfish was still fairly abundant. I don't think it was abundant to the extent it was in the 1940s and 50s, but it was abundant. And these redfish boats, these three big company boats, the St. Patrick and the Red Jacket were the big Lend-Lease steel boats from the Second World War. The Wawanock was a little smaller, and I think built for a more for the U.S. Georges Bank fishery, and wound up later on in the redfish fishery, as far as I can see. But anyway, they were at the time in the early 70s. They would have been fishing in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, and they were making, I think, fairly long trips. And they towed only during the daytime. At night, the redfish would come up off the bottom, and what groundfish were around would come up off the bottom as well, and they would lay up, which is something you don't really hear much about nowadays, guys laying up at night. It's pretty much a 24-hour operation, insofar as I know, dragging off here. Anyway, so I can remember going down there one night with a friend of mine who was hoping to get on, and he was told there were no sights, but that if he came down and somebody didn't show up, he might jump on this was the St. Patrick. And we went down and looked the boat over, and it was immaculate. They were very well maintained. You could literally eat off the floor in the engine room. It had a big V16 cat for a main engine, and I think a couple of smaller cats for auxiliary power. But anyways, we walked around the boat, rattled around the boat. But I eventually did get on the Vandal. I think it was a year later or 3 seasons later. I think I got on the following spring. The Vandal was owned by a guy named Sonny McIntyre. It had been owned by the Harris Company, which was a big chandlery, I guess you'd call it, here in Portland. And but they owned a few boats, and the Vandal was one of them. And the Harris Company is now long gone. There were there's condos where the Harris Company was, but it was a great big place. So you could go in there and you could buy twine. You could buy anything you wanted for a boat for your boat, from grease to oil to twine to anything you could almost conceive of, and it would all come down the stairs on a chute. So you'd go in there and you'd order it, and it was all most of the guys in there were Harris's, and the stuff would come bouncing down this chute if you were ordering twine or gloves, whatever. And they also had a boat, and the boat would come around. If you needed fuel, you'd call Harris Company. You didn't have to go to the fuel dock. They would come to you, and they could put aboard your fuel. They'd sell you. We bought oil by the barrel on the Vandal. The Vandal was a big boat. It was, I think, 101 feet overall. Anyway, you could buy your gloves, anything you wanted, they would deliver. And when you were ashore, you could go up there. We had air start valves on the Vandal, and they were temperamental. They would stick. This was, I think, later models. We had an old Fairbanks Morse engine in the boat. I think later models had a more sophisticated or more reliable air start system, which injected air across a flywheel and spun the engine up that way. But in the Vandal, there was an air start valve in each cylinder, and we had 5 cylinders, and they were very prone to sticking. And if they stuck, you had to take them to somewhere to get them fixed. And of course, they went to Harris Company, where